The Samsung Odyssey G7 27-inch is a very special monitor to me. It's 240Hz, has a 1440p resolution, and has very good response times. But if the title of the video is anything to go by, is it worth your hard-earned $700? Find out after this message from today's sponsor, me! What, you thought a company cares about a channel with 3,000 subscribers? Of course not! But if you guys do, just smash the like button and subscribe button, both of which are free and help support the channel. Done? Awesome. Let's begin. When this monitor was announced, I was both extremely excited and nervous. Why? I'm glad you asked. Excited because this is not only a 240Hz monitor, but also has a 1440p resolution. Now you might be saying to yourself, but Bijan, that's nothing new. The Omen X27 can do that. And you'd be right. However, the Omen has a TN panel and no gaming features, which is absurd for the $650 they're asking for. What's different here is that the Samsung not only has gaming features to help you become a better gamer, such as a black equalizer, but also has a VA panel, and that VA panel is what makes me and many others scared. Well, what's wrong with VA, you say? Again, glad you asked. VA panels aren't particularly known for their gaming performance, ghosting to be specific, as well as having an acceptable amount of backlight bleed. So let's tackle those first, starting with the response time. The G7 has 4 levels of overdrive: standard, fast, fastest, and fastest again with MBR. MBR meaning motion blur reduction, which is basically an ELMB or extreme low motion blur function. Starting with standard, how well does it do? Surprisingly not bad. With Alex the Alien moving at 1920 pixels per second, it's not only good, but when you compare it to the Asus VG259QM, which is a 240Hz superfast IPS monitor, the Samsung actually looks slightly better, which is surprising for a VA panel. But does it get better if we increase the Samsung's overdrive, or does it get worse and start to overshoot? Let's see. Moving on to faster, it doesn't look like anything really changes, and moving on to the fastest also shows the same results. It's when we move to fastest with MBR that we start to see any changes, and good ones at that. Blur has been reduced by quite a bit, and when I was tracking the Alien with my eyes, the difference was as noticeable as this picture shows. Here's the Asus with ELMB for comparison. This VA panel ain't half bad. Now, being that this is basically an ELMB function, it does lower the monitor's brightness, but not as much as some other monitors with ELMB. Usually ELMB cuts the peak brightness by half, but here with ELMB off, the typical brightness was 332 nits, and with it on, it was 234 nits, only a 30% decrease. So it seems to balance the monitor's brightness and motion blur reduction tech very well, not lowering the brightness super low like some other monitors, while still giving very good results. Also, for those wondering, with Adaptive Sync on, it looks the same, but blocks you from adjusting anything. How about backlight bleed though? Before we get to that, keep in mind this will vary from unit to unit, so yours may be better or worse than mine. Okay, ready? I'll start with 0 brightness and increase it by 10 every second or so till we get to 100 brightness. I wouldn't say this is the worst I've seen, but this isn't good. This is annoying to look at in everyday use, and especially when you're watching a movie or a video that has dark scenes. Very noticeable. But VA panels are just doing what VA panels do best, I suppose. Next is the black equalizer. Being that this is a VA panel and has 3 to 5 times higher contrast ratios than your typical TN or IPS panel, you can probably imagine that dark areas are much darker than the other 2 panels, and they are by quite a lot. Let's start with the Asus VG259QM just to give you an example of the normal brightness of a super dark scene for your typical IPS or TN panel. Notice that even though the black equalizer is off, a lot of things are pretty visible. Now let's switch over to the Samsung. No, not a black screen. I said, let's switch over to the Samsung. Oh, this isn't a black screen. It's just so dark that I can't see a damn thing. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, because say you're playing a cinematic game like Metal Gear Solid 5 or whatever cinematic game you like to play. Because the much higher contrast ratio of the VA panel, it gives way more dynamic range that your typical IPS or TN panel can't, which adds depth and immersion instead of having those gray blacks that you're used to seeing. However, we're not talking about a game with cinematics. We're talking about professional hide and seek, and with this amount of blacks, you're not going to be seeking anyone. So what about when we turn down the black equalizer? Turn down? Wait, what? You heard that right. For some reason, Samsung thought that it was logical to decrease the black equalizer setting to increase the brightness of the dark areas. It should be the other way around. I guess they're implying that you're decreasing the gamma, but I don't know. Anyway, if we de-increase the black equalizer to the max, not only does the screen brighten up, but it makes the backlight bleed much more visible. Now sadly, this is already what the Asus looks like with its black equalizer off, and the Asus has more color. And unfortunately, there is no color vibrance feature on the Samsung to add colors when needed like right now. Don't assume it's bad just yet though, because Tarkov is kind of an extreme example. So how does it fare in a game like Siege? Well, it does better. With the black equalizer off, things look fine. Everything is visible, but we could use more visibility. Cranking the black equalizer to the max eliminates almost all shadows, so enemies can't blend in with dark areas. But again, there's no color vibrance feature, so things will stay washed out, meaning that enemies can blend in with their background sometimes. So for those who want an amazing black equalizer, this isn't it, but it isn't bad. Now, if you love the added dynamic range that its high contrast gives with its super deep blacks, you're going to absolutely love it as long as you don't mind the backlight bleed, because it is super noticeable. Things do turn around though when it comes to everything else about the display. As I mentioned earlier, it has a 240Hz refresh rate, meaning that everything is buttery smooth. It has a 1440p resolution, so not only is the pixel density of 109 ppi or pixels per inch very nice to look at, but you can also be more productive fitting more on screen. And because there are no other reviews or articles as of filming this video, and Artings isn't selling their input lag tester, I'm unsure of input lag. Artings, hit me up with one of your input lag testers. It has a typical brightness of 335 nits with a peak brightness of 600 nits with HDR, and has a fantastic contrast ratio of 2443 to 1. It also has a 1000R curve, which personally I'm not a fan of unless it's an ultra-wide, but some of you seem to love it. And lastly, it includes G-Sync and FreeSync Premium Pro. Now because this is a VA panel, it has great viewing angles. The G7 does great from the side and the bottom, and does just good from the top. VA panels aren't as good as IPS panels in this aspect, but they're not far off, and they're way better than their TN counterparts. It also does very well in gamut coverage and color accuracy, with its 100% coverage of the sRGB color space, 80% of Adobe RGB, so you photo editors will be happy, and for you video editors, you'll be super pleased with its 88% coverage of the P3 color space. So for all you professionals out there that also like to game, you can have your cake and eat it too. Color accuracy was just as impressive both post and pre-calibration. If you're just a regular Joe who buys a monitor and does not get it professionally calibrated, basically the majority of you, you can expect really good delta E's. My unit in particular gave a delta E of 2.22 right out of the box, which is very good. If you don't know what a delta E is, basically it's just how accurate or inaccurate the monitor's color reproduction is. 0 is perfect and 5 or more is just bad. With anything around a delta E of 2 such as this, it makes it extremely difficult for the untrained eye to notice any difference. Keep in mind though, this is just on my unit. All monitors produce different results, but I don't think yours will be too different. Because if you go to the picture setting on your OSD, there's an option called Calibration Report that lets you check your pre-calibrated delta E from the factory, meaning that Samsung does some calibration before sending you your monitor. Back to color accuracy, when the G7 is calibrated, it produces near perfect results with a delta E of 0.49, so colors will look pretty much exactly as they're supposed to the human eye. Now let's talk about the design and some of the smaller details of this monitor, both the good and the bad. Despite the unusual mounting mechanism, this does include another mounting plate which adds support for 100 by 100 VESA mounting, so you can put this on a monitor arm or stand. The RGB on the rear and on the bottom of the monitor adds a nice touch to the monitor's design. However, the RGB on the front is basically useless because you can't see it when you're sitting in front of the monitor. I have no clue if this was intentional or not, but it is worth pointing out. If you take off the cover on the stand, you'll be able to see the wire routing situation and hide your wires so wiring looks less messy. It has a limited amount of I/O, including a headphone jack, one HDMI 2.0 port, two DisplayPort 1.4 ports, and a USB Type-B 3.0 or 3.1 Gen 1 port, or whatever the hell spec super speed is supposed to be. Anyway, it also includes two USB Type-A super speed ports. The one closest to the monitor is for service, and the other one is for anything you want to plug in. It also includes supercharging, meaning that anything you plug into this port will charge faster than your standard USB port. It has tilt, height, swivel, and pivot adjustment, twisting and turning every which way you need a monitor to twist and turn. It includes a giant power supply to power the monitor. And lastly, we cannot forget the also gigantic stand. The stand on this monitor takes up so much desk space that I had to leave the back of the monitor hanging off of my desk so my mousepad can fit. I've said it plenty of times and I'll keep saying it till my face turns blue, but legs that spread out like this is, I think, terrible design, mainly because of how much desk space they usually take. While we're on the subject of the design, I think it's just nice. The design fits both gamers as well as professional or enterprise workplaces. It's not too boring and not too gamery, minus the RGB in the front, but I think this fits in any type of environment. The turbine-like design on the rear of this monitor gives it such a nice and distinctive look, especially when you have the RGB enabled. There's also the Odyssey logo on the rear, which looks pretty cool, I think. And other than that, it's not offensive or crazy in any way, and is all dark gray and black and is completely made out of plastic. Then in the front of the monitor, we have pretty slim bezels. They're not the thinnest, but at 1 centimeter thick, I doubt you'll be complaining. The chin is also pretty slim compared to plenty of other monitors at 2.2 centimeters thick. And while we're on the subject of the chin, under the chin is a single nipple which serves as a double function for both the power button as well as a nipple for the OSD. Turning it to the left or right gives you a quick access to your display sources, down accesses your quick volume, up accesses your quick brightness, contrast, and sharpness, and pushing it in accesses more menus. Starting with the game menu, you can adjust your refresh rate right from the monitor, your black equalizer, response time, adaptive sync, a lower input lag option, which doesn't say by how much it'll lower it, but I felt no difference with it on versus off, and a crosshair. This crosshair in particular is pretty cool compared to most I've ever seen. Just like any monitor, you can select whatever crosshair is available, and once you do, you can adjust it wherever you want within this blue square. Then we have picture settings, which lets you adjust your typical picture mode or color presets, brightness, contrast, sharpness, color, etc. By the way, picture mode seems to be pretty useless in this monitor. In some monitors, when you enable FPS mode or RPG mode or whatever, usually you'll get some added functionality, but for the G7, they're just different profiles for whatever setting you want saved for each profile. Other than that, nothing special, but it is nice. Then you have picture-in-picture mode or picture-by-picture mode, which lets you have two different sources display at the same time. However, when you use this, it squishes the image in and you have a crap ton of input lag. And then you have the system settings, which is where you find the option to turn on and off your core lighting or RGB lighting. You can enable or disable the local dimming of the QLED display or let it decide for itself. You have your volume for the monitor, dynamic brightness, which is just the brightness and the contrast of the screen automatically changing depending on what you're looking at, a timer, and disabling or enabling the supercharging function on that USB port that I mentioned earlier. Other than that, it's pretty logically laid out, but unfortunately there is no software-based OSD for Windows 10. One thing that does work though, and pretty well at that, is the HDR functionality. The G7 has VESA's HDR 600 certification, meaning that the monitor's peak brightness is at least 600 nits, and man, does it get nice and bright when you're watching HDR content. I'm not going to show any clips because I don't want to have to worry about a copyright claim and claim it's fair use and all, because it's a headache. But what I can say is that the highlights get really bright compared to SDR. However, some whites of a scene will be blown out no matter how much you adjust it through Windows. But way more often than not, HDR looked very nice, and unlike HDR 400 certified displays, this did improve the visual experience, and by a good margin. And personally, I'd keep using it when I'm watching HDR content or playing HDR games. Okay, now I think I touched up on everything I wanted to, but knowing me, there's probably something I forgot. But in conclusion, what do I think of the Samsung Odyssey G7 27-inch, and is this a monitor you should buy? Well, if you are dead set on getting a 240Hz 1440p display right now, you only have two options, at least if you're in the US. The HP Omen X27 and this. The Omen is $650 and this is $700. And let me tell you, that extra $50 gets you so much more that the Omen can't even touch. So this is the obvious play. Now, if you're a competitive gamer, the response time is really good with or without ELMB, has very low input lag, and a black equalizer that'll work just fine if you're not playing super dark games like Escape from Tarkov. Anything like CSGO, Siege, or Valorant will be fine. However, this is a 27-inch monitor, meaning that this is not the best for competitive use, since you have to look further from the center of your screen for HUD information. A 24 or 25-inch monitor would be better unless you have like a gigantic desk that allows you to push the monitor far back, giving you the effect of a smaller monitor. And if you're literally anyone else who just wants a great all-around 240Hz 1440p display, you'll be 100% happy with this. Other than the great response time, low input lag, and usable black equalizer, it gets very bright and has super high contrast ratio, making not only HDR content look good, but also SDR content. And the good color accuracy out of the box means that you don't even have to worry about calibrating the monitor, and overall I think it's worth the $700 price tag. As long as you do not mind playing the panel lottery and hoping that you get a unit with a better backlight bleed than mine. But if you can wait a few more months or quarters, Lenovo and Eve will be releasing their 240Hz 1440p displays, with the Lenovo being a TN panel and the Eve Spectrum being an IPS panel. and that's the one that I'm most excited for. And being that I'm not sponsored and I have to pay for everything that I review, I'm going to return to Samsung only because of the terrible backlight bleed and hope that the EVE Spectrum is better. Thanks for watching the video. If you guys enjoyed it, please leave a like. If you hated it, please leave a dislike. It helps me anyways, so have fun. Subscribe if you guys want to see more, and if you want to see more results on the ghosting performance, visit my website, which is going to be in the video description, as well as follow my socials, which are both in a pinned comment and in the description below. Other than that, have a great day, every day. Peace.